Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because this is Airwindows ShortBuss. Now, you might not recognize this, but this is a variation on the original concept that turned into Righteous. And I've been seeing people using Righteous for things, such as fooling around with bass tones and stuff. And it seemed to me that it would be a fine idea to dive back into this and see if I could get more out of it. And I certainly did. But first, let's hear what it sounds like to the extent that you're hearing it. What ShortBuss always was, and still is a thing that messes with kind of second harmonic. It's not that dissimilar to NC-17 either, but it's mostly what produced Righteous. And what it's doing is it's tracking the amount of asymmetry in the sound and either heightening it or cutting it back. That's new. Didn't used to be able to do that. What does that sound like? Well, here we have a guitar. And here we have a Alien Kittens. If we increase it, we get a sort of extra warmth quality going on. Fattens things up a little bit. However, if we, and I'm fooling with the setting, don't mind me. If we do the same thing, but we dial it back, we're doing the opposite. And what that's doing is that's taking out even harmonics and kind of purifying the lows in a way that you can't easily get with other kinds of processing. You can't really filter out an asymmetry in the sound because it's not necessarily a frequency control. This is a wave shape control. So what might we have to learn here? I have something to show you on this. Check this out. A little hard to see this, but I've got two sort of spikes. One of them is negative and one of them is positive. And if I set it up like this, you can see these are basically giant DC bumps. It's just a ramp from what started out as just a big DC voltage. So we're not going to play straight through this because nobody wants that. But what we can do is have a look at what ShortBuss does in this context. Because we can take this DC voltage that it's trying to do and neither heighten it or cut it back. And that's going to do something different than what you would get out of any filter. Cutting it back, however, it's a little bit like what you'd get out of a certain kind of filter, because we can cut it back and apply that. And we see that it has made the voltage cut back pretty sharply. It's making this shape because this is the way that it is compensating for the DC in there. It's trying to make the DC go away. It's doing the same thing with all the other, excuse me while I struggle with the controls, with all the other waveforms, but this is a giant DC voltage in there. However, if we do the additive effect, we don't even have to go all that far. We won't even go to full crank. Look at what we get now. You can see that it is taking the direction of trying to heighten the amount of asymmetry. And as such, it's boosting the DC voltage in this way, and then as we hit the other DC voltage, we still got a little bit of that offset, and then it's trying to boost that in turn. And I will go and undo that. And that's basically the idea. This is a here. Let's hear it a little bit more before we're done. Usually I'm in Reaper, but I wanted to be able to show this waveform, so this is Twisted Wave. It's hopefully behaving itself fairly well. I checked to see if it wanted any updates, and it may have updated itself to a point where it is fighting me and trying to get a subscription going. So I may not be sticking with Twisted Wave, but that's what this currently is. And here we have a guitar tone. And you don't necessarily hear the second harmonic stuff going on as much with this. We've got a certain amount of low frequency heaviness, and that's from added second harmonic, added asymmetry. Or we can take it away. And that's not actually removing frequencies. This is not a bass removal technique, but it's smoothing out anything that is asymmetrical. And there is an interesting side effect to that, which I'm not going to be able to demonstrate, at least not yet. But when I coded this and got it ready to work, and got ready to put it out as ShortBuss, I had to wonder whether there might be other purposes for this, and it originally existed only as boost the asymmetry. Anything where the waveform is leaning over to one side or the other, it will throw on second harmonic and modulate that and make it so that it's more asymmetrical, and that's what people do when they're using it as a bass warmth agitator. But what you get if you do it in inverse, I think, is fairly similar to what you'd get if you took a plate reverb and moved the damping plate real close to it. And I've tried this experiment, and I think it's working out fairly well. So ShortBuss is available for you to use right now. You go ahead and see if there's anything that you get to use in there. But it's also going to show up in its inverse form, the negative ShortBuss that wasn't available in the very first version. And it's finding its way into some new plate models that I'm trying to do, in hopes that I can make one with a more realistic damping plate, so that you have your big old sustaining plate reverb the way they normally work, but rather than trying to filter it, I want to physically restrain the plate from being essentially asymmetrical in the feedback loop, so that then the altered sound that you get from restraining it in this physical way goes back into the feedback of the reverb algorithm. And well, there's a lot to be discovered with all of this. I'm kind of looking forward to it. If anybody's been following my live streams, you'll know that I have a bunch of new algorithms coming together. I have an algorithm coming that's called discontinuity, and it comes from studying. Initially, it was space shuttle launches that gave me the idea for this, but then I found a YouTube video where one of the SpaceX heavies was taking off, and there was a very helpful video of people showing what it was like to watch this giant rocket take off from 6 miles away. And so the important thing for them was to go, yay, wow, that's amazing. But the important thing for me was to be able to listen to this thunderous noise, because if you are 6 miles out from a rocket takeoff. Air cuts back on high frequencies in such a way that in theory it's kind of like thunder when you're that far away from it. But the amplitude of the sound is so high, it stops being very much like thunder. And you start getting these really interesting sort of crackles, which I remembered from the space shuttle launch that my friend Bob Katz asked me to synchronize 2 stereo pairs of space shuttle launch recordings for a project that he had, because there's no out-of-the-box tool to do that. This is a long time ago. This is like 20 years ago. And I remembered this faint crackling, but in the new version, or anything, you can just go and find a footage of takeoff of a giant rocket from 6 miles away. And if they extend it for long enough, you'll hear this too. You will hear that the bigger the rocket, the more extreme the weird crackling becomes, and the more it turns into something entirely else. And that's the sound of the nonlinearity of air. And that's what I've been wanting to model. And with the new plugin, Discontinuity, that's coming out, it is a first try for doing that in a serious way. And I am really looking forward to exploring that a little bit more, because I would like to steer the direction that I'm doing currently, which is a bunch of console versions and things that bring you back the sounds of like the mid-70s or whatever, on the assumption that there is something that people like about that. I think what people like about that is that there is a realism that is lost in modern digital recording. Even though modern digital recording is technically accurate and more free of certain gross kinds of distortion, there is a serious problem with it no longer being able to convey realism, even though the accuracy has its own thing going on. Like for scientific measurements, it's quite good. For realistically conveying a human experience, it's extremely bad. And I'm very interested in seeing whether I can go beyond the release of old console versions and things like the MCI and the Quad 8 that I've already done. I'm going to continue to do those because they're very interesting. But I really want to see whether I can come out with a new form of sound that's recognizably different from everything that we deal with today, and get that going. So on that note, I hope you enjoy ShortBuss. It's part of this whole process, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.